So again, my name is Shane. I appreciate the invitation to speak with you all today. I'm a psychologist by training, and I also get to be the Director of Innovation for the Sinneave Family Foundation. And I'll tell you a little bit more about Sinneave here in a moment. I'm presenting to you today from Calgary. Calgary is the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Tsuut'ina First Nation, the Aaxie Nakota Nations, and the Métis Nation of Alberta Region 3. We pay our respect to elders past and present for stewarding the land, the water, the life in the region, and we acknowledge the harms and the mistakes of the past and seek to move forward together to make things better for the future and to be intentional about equality, inclusiveness, and our learnings from the past. Before we dig into the content of the presentation, I do want to make a note about the language that will be used within the presentation. Several years ago, CASDA, who some of you may be familiar with, the Canadian Autism Spectrum Disorder Alliance undertook a survey that was published in 2020 to look at language preferences within those on the spectrum across Canada. And over half of the group, individuals on the spectrum, reported that they prefer identity-first language over person-first language. Now, for those of us who have been in the autism space or in the helping professions, whether that's you're a parent, you are a service provider of some kind, we have either learned, been trained to use person-first language. So it's a person with autism as opposed to an autistic adult. But out of respect for individuals' rights to choose, their right to choose how they want to be referred to, we are showing our respect by using the preferences of the majority of Canadian autistics by calling them autistic individuals, autistic students, autistic employees, etc. So throughout the presentation, you're going to hear me use identity first language in addition to some person first language. We will use both. The Sinneave Family Foundation is an operating foundation based out of Calgary, Alberta. Established that. Our three large areas of focus are employment, post-secondary education, and housing and independent living. Those are three areas that I think we all are aware are areas where engagement of autistics is much lower, success is much lower than they are in the non-autistic space. So we have targeted those as the three outcome areas that we're trying to move the needle on for autistics in the Calgary area. We do that in a variety of different ways, from trying to build capacity by supporting organizations, whether they're employers, post-secondary institutions, or housing providers, or anyone in the community who is interested in learning more about autism. We provide lots of information, knowledge exchange, open source all of our materials to try to get that information out there, in addition to offering our own in-house programs and services. Our agenda for the next little bit, we're going to talk about the concept of self-determination. Self-determination, spoiler alert, is really the piece that impacts or affects whether somebody is motivated. There's some reflection exercises embedded within our talk today that my hope is to get you to think about your own motivation, how you approach self-determination for yourself, like what are those things that support or limit your feelings of self-determination and ultimately motivation. And for those of us who are autism serving in our work, or parents who it's part of your life, what are the things that you can do to help support self-determination and ultimately motivation in the individuals that we do support. Necessarily, we need to talk about the difference between intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. We're going to look at a few, I think it's about 6 ways to build self-determination in someone. And then a personal challenge that I'm going to offer to you around how to enhance motivation in either yourself or others. I think it should be noted as well that this information is not autism specific at all. This is information that is part of just human existence. The research on intrinsic motivation, on self-determination, this is stuff that, as a science psychologist, and many disciplines have been studying this for decades and decades. It's only been in the last maybe 15 to 20 years that there's really been a concerted effort to apply what we know about the general population to individuals on the spectrum. And this was actually part of my doctoral dissertation many years ago. So I'm very excited about this work and to be able to talk about it. So why are we talking about motivation? I think it was 79 was, if not the first, one of the first publications that explicitly discussed motivation and autism. The authors were Bob Cagle, so Cagle and Nagel, 1979. That was the first time that motivation was really discussed as a concept, as something worth studying within the autism space. For many decades to follow, the baseline assumption has been that individuals on the spectrum have low motivation. And we certainly, and we're going to explain all of that throughout this presentation, but I think that anyone who has spent any time around an autistic individual of any age would at least see some evidence of what would look like as low motivation. That I think is something that has just become, or at least was, an accepted fact within our field, within the autism space, that autistics have low motivation. What research has shown in the last decade or decade and a half, maybe a little bit more, is that that assumption needs to be questioned. That assumption, I mean, I'll just say outright, is false. In 25 years that I've been working in this space, I have yet to meet an autistic who genuinely has low motivation, the way that we think about low motivation. Frankly, it's what appears as low motivation is actually the result of experience, a result of struggle, a result of a mismatch between the skills and abilities they have and the demands of the environment. And we're going to dissect all of that over the next handful of slides. We know that autism is a difference in how the brain processes information. Sinneave as an organization, we do not believe in, or we don't ascribe to the medical model where we see autism as a deficit. We really see autism as a difference, and that difference brings with it, yes, there are some struggles that autistics may face, but it also brings a whole host of strengths. And fundamentally, we see that difference as a difference in the way that the brain senses, perceives, processes, and acts in the world. Part of the normal variation of human development, there is nothing about it that is disordered, is our opinion. When you have that difference in brain processing, that is common and is observed in the autistic space, I think we could probably all at least agree that society is constructed in a way that favors non-autistic processing. So how you sense, perceive, think about, and react to your environment, society is constructed in a way that is very much non-autistic. And so the experiences of autistics over time has really been that square peg round hole phenomenon, where individuals are being forced to
listening to a talk on motivation.
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry. The situation really has been the case that individuals on the spectrum have been forced to live in an environment or find themselves in an environment of society that expects other behaviors, other ways of processing, other ways of engaging. And that difference, that mismatch between the strengths, the skills, the needs, all of that are in from autistics versus the needs of the environment, that mismatch sets the stage for feelings that I'm trying, but I'm not successful. It sets the stage for repeated effort, trying to engage, trying to be successful, wanting to be successful, but repeatedly struggling, repeatedly failing, not understanding why. Now, as part of the human condition, and actually the research goes back many, many years, it has nothing to do with even the human condition, it's interspecies. But when we find ourselves in a situation where we're putting out all kinds of effort, we're trying, and we're repeatedly struggling or failing, it sets the stage for what we call learned helplessness, whereas we feel helpless in changing our situation. That learned helplessness, if left unchecked, if it continues, sets the stage for learned hopelessness. And that really is the conditions that open up the door for people for their anxiety to spike. We see more masking of that autistic show, or any neurodiverse individual for that matter. We see withdrawal from society, from social interactions, and an increase in depression, an increase in suicide ideation, as well as suicidal attempts. When we look at all of the mental health difficulties that we observe in the autism space, numbers, rates that far exponentially exceed what we see in the non-autism space. Many of those things, of course, there's a genetic component to a lot of mental health difficulties, but many of those mental health difficulties are the direct result of this learned helplessness that has led to learned hopelessness. So that's a really, really important point that is going to shape the rest of this presentation. So I really want people to hold on to that idea that this appearance of low motivation is not, it's not low motivation, or that individual is not motivated to try. They're not motivated to be successful the way that I think we judge it to be, and the way that we think about motivation in a general sense in our society. Rather, particularly for the autism space, if we're talking about low motivation, we need to be thinking about it, framing that discussion from the space of a learning history of struggle, failure, a lack of success, which has undermined that person's desire to want to continue to do that thing that they've been unsuccessful with. So, that shines a great big light on people's coping skills, on their ability to, or their own resilience, their ability to persist in the face of adversity. It explains a lot about why individuals on the spectrum may be experiencing all of the mental health difficulties that they are. So let's sit on that, think about that. I want you to continue to mull that over as we're talking further through this presentation about your own motivation, about your own feelings of self-determination, and how these ideas could explain or help you to interpret what you see from the autistics that you support. When we are not motivated, we see sort of very specific symptoms or the effects of the problem. We're going to talk about the definition of motivation here in a second, but really, when we're talking about or making an inference about someone's motivation, we're really making that inference based on the symptoms that we see or the effects of that. So disinterest, passiveness, giving up easily, right? A lack of perseverance, not having a desire to even initiate or try, general sort of unhappiness. Those are common or commonly reported effects of somebody who is not motivation, or somebody's not motivated, somebody with low motivation. In contrast, when there is motivation, we see inspiration, we see commitment, perseverance, we see excitement, we see this natural curiosity, we see happiness. I think it's really important that as we are thinking about ideas of health and wellness, that we're thinking about the evidence or the symptoms of what health and wellness might be. What are those things that would be indicators of health and wellness, well-being? There are very much these characteristics. And these are characteristics that, you can't teach passion, you can't teach excitement, you can't teach curiosity per se, but you can set the conditions that inspire these things to grow. And when we get to the strategy section at the end, when we get to some of the takeaways, things that you can do for your own lives, as well as for the lives of those people that you support, there'll be tangible things that you can think about doing that are going to set the stage for these things to grow. Defining this elusive construct of motivation. One of the things that has been a criticism of this area of study is that it is steeped in circular reasoning. The question is, well, how do you know if someone's motivated? Because they're doing that thing. Well, why are they doing that thing? Because they're motivated. Why? How do you know they're motivated? Because they're doing the thing. And it just goes on and on and on. So that circular reasoning doesn't actually explain anything. It gets us no closer to understanding what's working and what's not working. We really need to dig a little bit deeper in order to really understand the construct so that we can act on it. Otherwise, it's just it's an interesting thought exercise, but it doesn't give us anything to do about it. So in an attempt to try to define this invisible construct, this motivation, the easiest way to think about it is it's the desire to start or to persist. Some people talk about it as a drive, right? Like similar to the hunger drive or the sex drive or whatever. They think about it as this internal fire, but that fire is really about the desire to start something or to continue to persist in an activity. Seems simple enough, but we need to dig into it a little bit more. And what's the rationale for wanting to dig into it? Because motivation produces results. As evidenced by the picture here of this individual with all of the medals on her arms. Motivation is something that produces results. You cannot get results. You can't get success unless there was some degree of motivation. That needs to be there. Before we think about others, it's really helpful, I find, to think about yourself. Think about what motivates you and why some of those things are important, for sure, but more importantly, how your motivations change day to day and how different variables interact to either enhance or undermine your motivation. So we all know that motivation varies minute by minute, right? In the morning, whether you're caffeinated or not caffeinated, by the end of the day, whether you've had a whole bunch of meetings versus very few meetings and more desk time, your energy level, wellness, how did you sleep last night, your eating habits, downtime. There's any number of things that will impact whether or not a particular thing motivates you. I mean, I've got a list here of a bunch of things that, show up as motivators for people, but depending on all of those things that are listed on the left-hand side and the interaction between those things will impact whether or not I'm motivated by those things on the right-hand side. So motivation is something that is slippery. It changes constantly. So you can't expect that, any one person, and again, I guess I'm jumping ahead. When you think about yourself, you know yourself that your motivation varies moment by moment. There's any number of things that impact it. And those times where you're not motivated, maybe you're off in your golf game, or you didn't, you went over to the gym to Orange Theory and you didn't push yourself as hard that day. There's any number of reasons why you may say, well, you know what, I'm not feeling it today. I'm not at my best. I didn't sleep last night. Shane didn't put enough gel in his hair. Like, there's any number of reasons why we will justify our motivation and why it's okay that we are, as highly or less motivated that day. We cut ourselves some slack pretty easily. However, the flip side is when it comes to others, we tend to judge others for their motivation quite readily. So we may look to someone else and say, oh, well, they're not trying hard. They're not motivated. They're not interested in pursuing whatever that goal is. They're kind of lazy. We will judge others very, very quickly, but cut ourselves some slack. I think that's part of the human condition. So, we do that, but I think it's something that we need to catch ourselves doing for a variety of reasons. One of which being that if I am saying or labeling someone else's motivation is the result of some personality characteristic, like that person is lazy or they're not capable, what that ends up doing, if you're voicing that, if you're thinking about it without thinking about what you're saying or what you're thinking, the following, or the assumption that rises is that it's out of everyone's control to help them, that they are helpless. You cannot change their motivation. And I think that's an important discrimination. You recognize in yourself that your motivation changes constantly, and some days you'll be more motivated than you are other days. But when we're thinking about other people, we tend to paint that sort of big brush, overgeneralization. Oh, I'm seeing them today unmotivated, therefore they're lazy and they're not motivated. And then we don't try as hard to help to motivate them. We don't try as hard to help them be successful. So it's a bit of a reality check that I want people to experience when you're thinking about the motivation of yourself and others. You have to believe that other people's motivation is just as variable as your own. You have to believe that they are just as motivatable, that's it, just as motivatable as you are, if the things that we're going to talk about and the strategies that we're going to share are something that you're potentially going to be successful with. You have to believe that you can make the change in order to actually make the change. All right. So the key to motivation is really the construct or this idea of self-determination. Self-determination has been studied widely, referring to our innate psychological needs for growth, healthy development, and well-being. The two researchers, I mean, there's been many, but the researchers that have really brought this to the forefront are Richard Ryan and Edward Deci. Three components to self-determination. The ABC of it is autonomy, belonging, and competence. And I'm really of the opinion, which is in alignment with the research that they've put out, that those three factors need to be present in everyone's life in order for there to be the feeling of self-determination. It's not a pick one, it's a all three. So when we're thinking about our own lives, when we're thinking about the lives of others that we support, we need to be looking for opportunities to understand where these three components are in their life and how to enhance or facilitate more of these components. Because these components really are the recipe of this, to bake the cake that is self-determination. And again, just to explain that pathway, is that you can't teach self-determination, you can't teach motivation. But you can set the stage for the conditions by working on autonomy, belonging, and competence. You can set the stage for helping someone to feel more self-determined. And if someone experiences self-determination, if they are feeling more self-determined, they are going to be, the necessary byproduct becomes more motivation. So that is our pathway. We want to be, the lens that we want to be looking through is through autonomy, belonging, and competence. And that is the pathway that will get somebody to demonstrating or feeling and demonstrating more motivation. So we'll talk about autonomy, competence, and belonging each in turn. For the next couple of slides, we'll talk about the construct. So in this case, it's autonomy. Then we'll do look at that quick little self-reflection exercise. Then we'll go to the belonging, self-reflection, competence, self-reflection, just for a little expectation management there. So the first one, as I mentioned, autonomy. Autonomy is really about having a say in your life. You are the author of your destiny. You are the one who is deciding what you will do and how you will do it. That opportunity to, decide for yourself what you're going to do and how you're going to do it. This is something that I wish was an easily understood concept, but it is misunderstood more often than not. And within support programs, intervention programs, schools, I see this misunderstood and misapplied more often than not. Being autonomous is the opportunity to choose from among options. And it's important that you realize that choice making is not, for if there's, teachers in the room or parents, it's not, you will do your math or else, or, you will do your chores or you don't get the iPad. That is not choice making, right? That's a false choice. It's not a choice at all. That's really the action reaction, right? That's the contingency. Choice making is really about choosing between alternatives, which is also different from asking somebody, well, what do you want to do? And they, that open-ended question, that truly is not actually choice making. Because they might say, oh, I would like to go for a hike. And sorry, it's raining. We can't go for a hike today. Well, yes, you might have gone for the hike if it was a nice day, but there was only that one thing that they thought of. So that actually doesn't activate the choice-making sort of process in your brain. It's not actually exercising that autonomy. There needs to be options from which you choose. So something like, do you want to do your math on the computer, or do you want to do paper and pencil, right? There isn't a choice about doing the math, but there's a choice about how you do it. If it's about chores at home, you want to empty the dishwasher, or you want to take out the garbage. Those are choices. So the opportunity to choose from those alternatives actually does activate the choice-making part of the brain. Like that, whatever's activated in the brain, and sort of my neuropsychology isn't up to speed enough to know exactly what area that is, somewhere in the prefrontal. But the point is, in order to activate that experience of choice-making, that experience of autonomy support, there actually has to be a choice from alternatives. And we obviously do not want to offer choices that we cannot follow through with. If I say to someone, hey, do you want to go and play some video games for a while, or do you want to go for a hike? And they say, oh, let's go for a hike. And then you go, you know what, the weather's not very good. I don't really feel like going for a hike. You're actually undermining their experience of autonomy there, because they've made a choice and then you said, no, we're not going to do it. So from an action standpoint, if you want that person to feel autonomous, you want to make sure you're only offering choices you can follow through with. Because the minute you remove that choice after you remove the option after they've made the decision, you now are actively undermining their sense of autonomy. So autonomy is about giving people options from which to choose, and they make the choice and you follow through with that choice. That is setting the conditions to experience a sense of autonomy. Hope that makes sense. Here's the reflection. What I want you to think about within your own lives is what part of these different contexts give you a sense of autonomy. If you think about, whether you're working, you're in school, home life, friends, wherever, what gives you that sense of autonomy? So where do you have a sense of control? If we're talking about work, right, your employer might say, this is the specific task I need you to do. So you don't have a sense of autonomy there. This might be the teacher at school saying, we are doing math right now. No, you can't, read your book for English class. We're doing math. In those situations, there's no autonomy support there, but autonomy support can be inserted when we think about, well, I can choose how I'm going to do that activity. I can choose where I'm going to do that activity. I can choose whether or not I do it by myself or I bring in a colleague or a peer. So I want people to reflect for a moment. I'm going to pause, give people a minute just to think about it across those different contexts. Do you have the opportunity to exercise a sense of control, choice making within any of those domains, because your feelings, your own personal feelings of self-determination are impacted by whether or not you have choice in those areas of life. Now, you don't have to necessarily have choice-making opportunities in every single context and domain in your life. And I would argue that it's unrealistic to think that you would. However, it's important that you have some across a variety of contexts. The more opportunities you have to exercise your voice, your say, and to have impact in your life, the more self-determined you'll ultimately feel. The more autonomous you're going to feel, which sets the stage for self-determination, and as I mentioned earlier, sets the stage for increased feelings of motivation. Let's move on next to belonging. So belonging is about being accepted as a member of a group. It's that secure relationship. Now, I want to make a distinction that yes, we know there's a lot of research and just we know this as sort of, I would call it common knowledge that having a secure relationship with a parent, right, or a caregiver is instrumental in healthy development and well-being. Absolutely, that's an important piece. But as awesome as us as adults and parents think that we will never be as cool as the peer group. That secure relationship for individuals has more to do with the peer relationship than it does with the parent or caregiver relationship. So that individual, that autistic individual at whatever age may have a fantastic, very secure relationship with the parents. But when we're talking about a sense of belonging, we're talking about this beyond the parents. So the parents, that relationship's great, but this is really about peers or others kind of like me, right? Whatever like me happens to be. That is really the critical piece. And why this belonging is so important, in particular in the autism space, is that because of some of the social difficulties that individuals on the spectrum face, the opportunity for them to have a strong peer network, to have one or more close friends, is a lot lower. The rates of that reported positive relationships, secure relationships, is a lot lower in the autism space than it is in the non-autism space. So knowing that right off the bat, that is a huge red flag for us. That how can we expect autistics to feel self-determined if they're missing potentially this, 1/3 of that 3-ingredient recipe, which is belonging. We need them to have a sense of belonging with a peer group. Now, an organization like Square Peg Society is doing work in that space, which is fantastic, having social groups, having opportunities for people to connect. We do that here at Sinneave. There's a lot of organizations that are really focusing in on that, and that is critical. Parents sometimes ask, well, does it matter whether it's virtual, online, or if it's in person, face-to-face? At the end of the day, no, it doesn't. What matters is that there's a strong relationship, that connection, that belonging that happens. And if that individual on the spectrum is finding that group within an online platform, playing video games or otherwise, that's what's needed. What's needed is that connection. Where the connection is doesn't matter as much. Now, being the clinician at heart that I am, I would argue that there's definitely some advantages and some things to be gained from face-to-face, in-person social interactions. Absolutely. But, don't discount the power of online social relationships. Growing up, many of us had pen pals, right? We had connections to people that we never met through writing. Well, the video game world is no different than that. I mean, the nice thing about it is it's in real time now, where the pen pal thing, you might have to wait weeks or months to hear from your pen pal. So, I think it's important just to acknowledge that secure peer-based acceptance doesn't necessarily have to be in person. I think that everybody benefits from moderation. Everyone benefits from having multiple forms of contact and connection in their community. When we think about inclusion as a broader construct, I want every individual to be able to have the online presence, have a social presence within groups that are of like-minded individuals, get into different games, get into different sports, get into different clubs, get yourself involved in a variety of different activities to expand the opportunity, increase the likelihood that sense of belonging is there. Because the more opportunities to create and secure that belonging, the better. And just maybe as just another sort of factoid that I'll throw out there, because I can't help myself, is that I've been asked by many parents, should we take access to computers and video games away from our child because they spend all their time in the basement playing games and they're not out in the world? And I would, for all of the reasons I mentioned, I would say no. I wouldn't do that. That would not be my recommendation, because the video game isn't just entertainment. It's likely also that individual's social connection. So if you now take that away from them, then you're taking away not only fun, but you're taking away potentially a sense of belonging. And we don't want to do that, right? So just keep that in mind when we're thinking about how people spend their time, how they, of the three things for self-determination, the belonging piece in particular, if there isn't another opportunity for belonging, then you're actually removing 1/3 of the ingredients for the recipe for success. So a little bit of reflections. Where do you get your sense of belonging? Across environments. What part of work gives you that? Is it the staff room as a break? Do you work closely with a colleague? What about at school? If you're in school right now, do you have, whoops, sorry about that. Do you have some peers that you study with, that you attend class with, that you eat lunch with, extracurricular activities? Do you have groups that you connect with? Whether it's going for a hike, playing golf, whatever it is that you might do. Family is okay, absolutely family is okay, but it's better if it's peer group. It's better if it's someone who is like you in some way, shape, or form. So I'm going to pause for a second and let you think about where in those contexts do you get a sense of belonging? The third and the final part of self-determination is about competence. Excuse me. And we're going to break competence down into some subcomponents, going a little bit further than we did with the autonomy and the belonging. But that's where we get into like the intrinsic, extrinsic motivation discussion. But competence is about the experience of feedback that tells us we're successful. We all desire signals or evidence that we're successful. When we are engaging in an activity, again, think about school, think about work. If you're doing your job, but you're not getting any feedback from your supervisor or your peers that what you're doing is good, that it's helpful, that it makes a difference, you're not getting the feedback you need to feel good about your work. If at school they took grades away, which that might be another can of worms that we talk about in another presentation. But if they took grades away so that students got no feedback on the effort that they were putting in, you would see a very abrupt change in student behavior, guaranteed. What that competence feedback does is it tells us whether our effort is worthwhile. Is it helping us out in some way, or do we need to change our behavior? It's not helping us out, so we're going to need to pivot and do something different. That competence feedback is most important when we value the skill that we're getting the competence feedback on. I think I'll use the example for myself, golf. I don't care about golf. I'm not a golfer. When I go to the golf course, all I do is make holes in the ground. I can't golf at all. So let's say I do hit one really good shot and everybody around me is like, hey, good job, well done, way to golf. I would say, yeah, thanks, but that doesn't do anything for me. That competence feedback, I don't really value. I value the people giving it to me, but I don't value the feedback because I don't value the skill. Golfing doesn't matter to me. So we want to provide competence feedback for the things that people value. That's really, really important. And the next layer to that really elevates the importance of that competence feedback is if not only you value that skill, but the people around you, your peer network, values that skill. So, if I'm thinking about a 15-year-old who I'm trying to work on that competence feedback and tell them a little bit about what they're doing well in life, hey, you emptied the dishwasher really, really well, right? That was awesome, thanks. Well, your feedback is not as powerful as peers, and they particularly likely don't value emptying the dishwasher. So that praise probably doesn't have that much value to them. It's not going to impact their feelings of competence to a large extent. But if it were the peers saying, wow, you did an amazing job at that video game that we all as a group love, that's going to be powerful competence feedback. So thinking about the source of the feedback, thinking about how it's delivered, where it's delivered, those are all important variables in trying to understand and influence whether or not someone is getting the competence feedback they need to be successful. Now, that's not saying that if you're trying to teach your child to empty the dishwasher and they do it, that you should ignore it and you should not comment. Absolutely, you need to comment, but just recognize that that feedback is probably not going to be as important to them as the feedback they would get from their peers over something that they value more. Now, looking at that feedback, again, feedback gives us information about our competence. It can be delivered in a number of different ways. What I want people to think about is the variety of different ways that we can either ourselves experience that competence feedback, or that we can share competence feedback with others. Because it's not just about a good job, way to go, that was awesome, I'm proud of you, you did well, but there are things like our body language, it's our tone of voice, it's being asked to engage more, it's being invited to participate in the next activity, being invited to the birthday party, being invited to go on another hike. It's being asked your opinion on things. These are all things, all indicators that people are valuing our contributions. And so, yeah, I'm sure many of us have seen online, the 101 ways to say good job. That's not even the tip of the iceberg. Like, if you want to provide important competence feedback, there's so many more ways that you can do that in your day-to-day interactions that I think are much more genuine, and I think set the stage a lot more effectively. So reflecting on those experiences that you have that tell you or inform you that you're competent, what are some examples of those things? Between work, school, friends, home life, how do your friends share with you that you're competent? Like, how do you know, based on your interactions with your peer groups, that they think you're competent and that you feel competent around them? Is it comparing golf scores? Is it, sitting around over coffee and chatting about what is it that they're saying to you? What are you experiencing that lets you know that you are competent in that relationship, in that interaction? We want to make sure that for the individuals we're supporting, autistic individuals, that they have ample opportunities to receive successful competence feedback, or I guess competence feedback about their success. Very, very important. Now, this little visual, I think I probably could have had this at the very beginning, but I want to use this as a bit of a summary slide to talk about how that competence feedback feeds into self-determination, feeding into motivation. And I think that you could also apply autonomy to this. You could apply the belonging components as well, but let's just look at it as competence feedback. So it starts out with, I am in a situation and I choose an action. So I've made a choice, I'm choosing an action, I'm deciding to do a thing. I then, after I've done the thing, I want to evaluate, did my actions have an effect on the environment or on the people around me? What impact did I have on those around me? Was that effect good or bad? Did it work out for me, or did it have no effect? Or did people get mad? Were people offended? Like, if you think about, a good example of this, going back to our earlier conversation about the learned helplessness, think about the social differences that autistics experience working in being in a non-autistic world. They try to engage in a social interaction with a non-autistic, and they'll say, okay, I'm going to try this thing. I'm going to try to engage, and then evaluate, okay, what impact did my actions have? Well, I'm looking at this person, and this person is now getting frustrated. They're not responding the way that I thought that they would. They're not including me in the conversation. I'm feeling left out, or I'm feeling rejected. All of those things. If that evaluation is, I tried engaging in the social interaction, and the effects of my actions were that it wasn't very good. I did not feel successful. Well, that is going to impact their feelings of effectiveness. They're going to walk away thinking, I am not effective at social interactions. And the behavioral expression of that is then reduced interest in wanting to engage again. There's only so many times you can struggle with something before it undermines your feelings of self-worth. You then say to yourself, I know I'm not effective at this thing. I struggle, I'm not good at it. Therefore, I must not be good. There's something about me that's wrong. So it absolutely will impact feelings of self-worth. That's where the feelings of, or poor feelings of effectiveness, or I phrase that differently, feelings of poorly, I can't conjugate this for the life of me. Feelings of poor effectiveness or not being very effective, that's some of that learned helplessness. If that continues, it feeds into feelings of low self-worth, learned hopelessness, right? That's where we see the spike in anxiety, masking, depression, and eventually there will be feelings of suicide ideation. That becomes a downward spiral, leading to more social isolation, more mental health problems, etc. But if the environment in which that individual finds themselves, when they choose that action and they evaluate the effects of their action, they realize, hey, that worked out for me. The environment was supportive. I got the accommodations that I needed. People responded to me well. I got the job. My manager's happy with my work. I had a really good, meeting with this peer, this coworker of mine. That's going to increase feelings of effectiveness, increase feelings of self-worth, and overall increase self-determination and motivation to do those activities and engage in those actions again in the future. All right. So we're talking about this thing called motivation. I want to dig into now intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. That's the basic way that we slice the pie in the field. We talk about these sort of two major bits. I would argue, though, that it's rarely as clean or as black and white as intrinsic versus extrinsic. There's often a little bit of melting of the two. However, just for the purposes of this conversation, we're going to keep them very black and white, and we'll keep them separate. Intrinsic motivation are things that come from within you. It's not external pressures. It's really this internal desire. You value the thing that you're doing. You think the thing is inherently just a good thing. You like it. You want to do it. No one has to ask you to do it. You're not doing it in order to try to get something in the future. The activity itself is enjoyable or fun. Extrinsic motivation, by contrast, is pressure being exerted upon you by someone else. It's somebody else who is saying, do this thing and you will earn this or get that. Or you yourself are saying, you know what, I'm going to force myself to sit down and I'm going to study for the next hour. And when I'm done, I get to walk to Starbucks and buy myself some fancy latte. And that's an extrinsic reward that you're giving yourself for engaging in a particular activity. So intrinsic is sort of the drive is within. Extrinsic, the drive or the pressure is outside of you. Now, many have argued that intrinsic motivation is ideal, right? It's preferred. Really, again, being pushed heavily by the research by Desi and Ryan and colleagues, they would maintain that when we are at our best as human beings when we are intrinsically motivated, because that sets the stage for us being well. If you look at any definitions or descriptions about well-being, wellness, thriving, if you start to dissect those definitions, you will see evidence of self-determination, evidence of, this idea of curiosity and happiness and people feeling like they are, intrinsically motivated at the end of the day. In contrast, these authors would argue that if you are extrinsically motivated, you feel constrained, and it ultimately will undermine your intrinsic motivation. They really do believe that these are universal concepts. Everyone feels this way. However, research has shown that it's not necessarily universal. When we've compared individualistic cultures like sort of Western cultures to more collectivistic cultures like Eastern cultures, we see that there are differences. There's differences in people's desire for that sense of self-determination or freedom versus more of that, my actions are for the good of my family. They're not for me per se, I'm doing this thing. I want to do this thing for others. And so, yeah, I would say that the conclusion is that it's not a universal construct. Extrinsic motivators, according to Deci and Ryan, would say that they're going to, extrinsic motivators will undermine your intrinsic motivation, but there's a whole breadth of research that actually supports that no, there are times where we can use extrinsic motivators to increase our motivation, which is really, they're two very different theoretical camps that have argued quite a bit about this. Incidentally, Cameron and Pierce were my supervisors in my doctoral dissertation. So I firmly sit in the camp that we can use extrinsic motivators to enhance intrinsic motivation. And there's a formula for how to do that. Now, before we get there, again, I think it's important to think a little bit about daily life and our practical application of reinforcement. Not all skills that we have in our repertoire were we ever intrinsically motivated to learn or do. For those of you who started playing an instrument, for example, it's very common that kids have to be, reinforced for playing the piano. You go and play the piano for a little while, and then you can go and watch TV or play on the computer. There's any number of examples of things where when we're not very good at something, we need an extrinsic motivator to help build our competence in it. And here's where these things start to come together. Initially, if I'm not very good at something, engaging in that thing is not very rewarding. It's not very reinforcing because I'm not getting positive competence feedback. I might be then motivated to do it because I'm getting this extrinsic motivator, and that's giving me my competence feedback. So, okay, that's fine. Over time, as that skill develops, as competence increases and we're feeling like we are better at the thing, we're more successful at doing that thing, we naturally start to shift. We don't need somebody else to program it for us necessarily. We naturally start to shift away from the extrinsic motivator because we're seeing our own performance grow. We're seeing our own skills and abilities grow. And over time, anyone who has spent time, with kids learning instruments, and I think that's just a common example. Initially, yeah, it might have been a lot of having to use extrinsic motivators, but over time, as the skill develops, you see that kids start to enjoy that activity a little bit more and a little bit more because they're seeing their success. They're seeing that evidence that they're doing well. So extrinsic motivators can be used to inspire learning and action, and they can be used over time to help to build some of that intrinsic motivation. Now, here's where some of the formula comes in. 3 concepts, and this is heavily based on my dissertation, as a matter of fact, but 3 concepts that are super critical from a strategy-based perspective. So if I want to set the stage to build intrinsic motivation, if I want to build that sense of competence, which is part of the 3 that are self-determination, autonomy, belonging, and competence, if I want to build that sense of competence, I want to make sure that I'm using a motivator that's highly valued by the individual. Now, this might be self-evident, but there's a difference between a reward and a reinforcer, right? A reward is, hey, you know what? If you empty the dishwasher for me, I'll let you vacuum, right? If the kid does not like vacuuming, that reward is not reinforcing. But if the child loves vacuuming, that is a very reinforcing outcome. So yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to learn how to empty the dishwasher if that's going to get me access to vacuum. For me, one of my number 1 reinforcers is a pint of Ben & Jerry's ice cream. You probably thought I was going to say a pint of beer, but no, Ben & Jerry's, number 1, Haagen-Dazs, number 2, and I'm willing to do just about anything for a pint of Ben & Jerry's. So for me, that is highly motivating. So I am happy to go and do the chore, to go do some exercise, go to the gym, go do a bunch of things that will then earn me a pint of Ben & Jerry's. Now, if you were lactose intolerant, that would not be reinforcing at all. That would be quite punishing. So it's really important that we're using those outcomes, those signals of competence, that those things are based on or are things that the individual loves. They want that thing. They have to really value that extrinsic thing in order for it to actually function as an eventual skill builder. The other thing is it needs to be performance-based. One of the things that happens more often than not is, we will say to somebody, I need you to go and do X, and I will give you access to Y, right? So it's basically nothing comes for free. You've got to earn this thing. Go and do this work, do this challenge, and I'll give you this reinforcer at the end. What they have to do, though, what it is you're asking them to do, you need to pay attention to that. If I say to them, I need you to go and just do this thing for 10 minutes, and then you've earned, like if you said to me, Shane, I need you to go and vacuum for 10 minutes, and then I'll give you a pint of Ben & Jerry's, I might say, okay, yeah, great. But all you said is vacuum for 10 minutes. So you have not described at all what the quality or the performance of vacuuming is. So maybe I just sit in one spot and go back and forth with the vacuum for 10 minutes. That technically would count based on the rule that you've set up. Or 9 minutes and 55 seconds go by where I've been sitting on the couch, and in the last 5 seconds, I turn the vacuum on, do one stripe across the carpet. There you go. I vacuumed. Give me my pint of Ben & Jerry's. Technically, the way that you set up the rule, I was successful, and I've earned that Ben & Jerry's. What we want to do is recognize that what we're rewarding or reinforcing in that moment is not like really good quality skill building. We're reinforcing kind of slacking off. An example that happens in the classroom a lot is teachers will say there's 10 minutes left of class, or I need you to work on your, whatever your homework is, do that for 10 minutes, then you can go play on the computer. Well, what does the kid do when they open up their math textbook? They're flipping around, they're kicking the calculator out, trying to write words with the calculator. They're making it look like they're doing work, but they might actually not be doing anything at all. But the fact that they've actually looked down at their work, technically, they've done what they've been asked to do. So if that reinforcer is then given, what we're reinforcing is mediocre performance. What we need to do is think about a performance-based criteria. So if you can vacuum this entire floor, all areas of the floor, moving the coffee table out of the way and vacuuming under it, wall to wall, edge to edge, then you've earned the reinforcer. If you sit down and do 5 math questions, you've earned the reinforcer. If you can, maybe it's a health goal. If you can work at, maybe you're trying to reduce the caloric intake of a client, because their diet isn't very healthy. They're taking in too many calories per day. So if you can reduce that by 100 calories this week, you've earned, something fun, not edible, something like a walk, a hike, something like that. It's thinking about increasing their skill or their success in some way and reinforcing that. That's a very, very important piece. So you need to have a performance-based reinforcer in order for intrinsic motivation to build. The last thing that I want to talk about is optimal level of challenge. And so similarly, that notion of, if I say to somebody, I want you to vacuum, and they just do one strip, and they're like, I'm done. Is that really an optimal level of challenge? Not likely. For somebody who's just learning how to vacuum, maybe has some gross motor control difficulties, one strip might be a significant challenge. So that would be reinforced. That's no problem. What we want to find is what is that optimal level of challenge that's going to keep that person with a higher rate of success than failure when they're going to earn their reinforcement, in order to earn their reinforcement. Now, the general operating rule is 4 out of 5, right? Or 80% correct. And it's not a coincidence that in the education system, in the intervention worlds, that 80% correct is always the criterion. We can never expect 100% success. That's just not realistic. 80% success, or 4 out of 5, that's based on a whole body of psychology research that says that in the majority of our interactions, if we have more opportunities, 4-to-1 ratio of successes to failures, we are more likely to value that activity. It's an activity that's challenging but realistic, and there's still room for growth. That's really important. So if we're thinking about schoolwork, right, if the kid's always getting 100% all the time, they're not being challenged. So we need to increase the challenge a little bit. Incidentally, that research has actually looked at, the health of relationships in couples. It's looked at people's satisfactions in the workplace. If you are receiving more than one negative comment for every 4, so you need 4 positive comments, 4 positive pieces of feedback, and to put it in terms of this presentation, you need 4 indicators of competence for every 1 indicator of you need to do better in order for you to value that activity and to feel like that's an activity that's worthwhile for you. Otherwise, you're setting the conditions that it's too challenging or it's too easy, and both of those will undermine intrinsic motivation. Very well documented. So when I'm thinking about working with someone, anyone that I'm supporting, autistic or otherwise, and if I'm finding myself saying, no, don't do that. Oh, I can't do that. No, that. Oh, no, don't do that. Oh, no, that's a big fat no. If I've just dropped 4 or 5 no's or don't, or that's not good enough, or you need to try harder, in order for me to keep their motivation high for that activity, I need to do a whole bunch of more things. So that's, if I dropped 5 things, I need to do 5 times 4. I need that many more, 20 more. Good jobs, way to go. That was awesome. Here's some success, in order for them to feel good about that activity or that interaction. So if you're finding yourself always telling the person no that they can't, I guarantee you're feeling like that relationship is strained, because that relationship is not based on indicators of optimal challenge, of competence. There's not enough positive feedback. Neither party is approaching that relationship at their best. So wrapping these all up together, we need to figure out what is the optimal level of challenge for any individual. And that optimal level of challenge is about 4 out of 5, or about 80%. That's what we're asking for. If the number gets above 80%, we need to increase the challenge in some way. If it drops below that, we need to add in additional support, break the task down more, prompt some stuff, provide more assistance, help, whatever the case may be, to get them up closer to 80%. You want to be hovering around that 80% mark for whatever it is that the person's doing. You want to then make sure, as part of that interaction, that their achievement is being reinforced. They don't get the reinforcement for doing nothing. They have to have achieved that 80% success, or whatever that optimal level of challenge is. They have to have achieved that in order to get the reinforcement. If you say to them, you tried really hard today, so 60%, okay, you can have the computer or something. That reinforcement of less than achievement is actually going to work against that individual in the long run. You may have to add support, you may have to help out, and that's fine. So the next time you do it, just drop the expectation down so that you're aiming for 80%. So optimal level of challenge, reinforce that performance, the actual successful completion or successful engagement in that activity, and make sure that your reward is in fact reinforcing. Those are the 3 tangible action items that you can do to support competence and build a sense of competence, which is part of the self-determination and motivation. All right. This here is a little bit of an evaluation for yourself or for others. My challenge for you is to, if you're someone who's in a support role, thinking about the person that you're supporting, thinking about the activities that you put together, the opportunities that you have in front of you, where within that activity is that individual going to experience autonomy, belonging, and competence? Those 3 things have to be there. So if you're setting up an activity, some social event, going on a hike, you're doing whatever it is that you're doing, you want to make sure you can address those. Describe how that will be experienced within your goal. If you're an educator or you work within the intervention space, how are those 3 things incorporated into your goal and into the activity that you're going to be targeting that day or in that moment? You really want to make sure that you've got that described, because the better it's described, you know this, if you don't have a goal written down, the likelihood is you're not going to actually work on the goal. So describe how and where you're going to do it, and you're going to be in a better place to set that up and ensure that the individual experiences those things. And then some reflections about appropriate challenge, value of the outcomes, and the performance-based reinforcement there. So that's my challenge for you, to think about that for yourselves, think about that for others. And I'm going to now just summarize. We know that motivation, although it might be a hard thing to define, sometimes it's a hard thing to understand or even observe, but it's something that can be developed over time. And it's rooted, the development is rooted in these three variables of autonomy, belonging, and competence. So people need to have the say, they need to be part of a group, that is, they need to be included, right? And they need to know that their actions produce valued outcomes. Those three things are absolutely critical. With performance-based reinforcement and considering that optimal level of challenge, you're setting the stage for that competence feedback to be as powerful as possible. Those are the elements, or I would call them the recipe, that at the end of the day sets the stage for the development of self-determination, which feeds into and supports motivation. So it's something that you absolutely can set the conditions for. Again, you can't teach motivation, you can't teach self-determination, but you can set the conditions to allow those things to flourish. And I think it's incumbent upon all of us that we try our best to do that. Reflect on our own lives and reflect on the lives of those we support. That's the end of the information. I will say that, so Sinneave Family Foundation, if anyone is interested in learning more about what we do, has any questions about this presentation or anything else for that matter, reach out to us. And then the last thing is, it's time for some discussion. Thank you for your attention, and yeah, let's chat.
Yeah, thank you. That was really interesting. I kept having like images of things that it brought up in my brain of like times when I felt like unmotivated, and then I would get like trapped in this like little bubble of thing you were talking about. Yeah, I didn't get any questions in the chat, but I'm sure people have questions, and I definitely have questions. So does anyone want to go first?
Hi, I have a question. This is Kayla.
Okay,
So I'm just going to give a situational scenario, and maybe you can kind of give a little bit of feedback. Right now, I have a 20-year-old daughter that we're trying to endorse her and, you know, promote her independence and her competence. And she has one good friend she's constantly going out with, and I applaud that, and I want her to go out. But now it's about coming home on time and having a curfew. And I know we're trying to get our independence, and, you know, her sister doesn't seem to have to come home at a curfew, but I try to explain it's about trust and it's safety. So we give her a curfew and we say, you have to be home by 9 o'clock because before it gets dark, because it's not safe in your sky training. And so, you know, she'll come home one night because she's trying, and I know she expresses, and now she's telling me on text where she is and what have you, but we'll come home one night at 9 o'clock and we'll get praise and a reinforcer, and she'll be very proud of herself. And then we'll proceed to come home 2 hours late for the next 4 nights. So I'm trying to be consistent, and I give her the praise and I give her the reinforcement, but yet, and I know it's hard. And I know when you're with your friends and what have you, you know, you get kind of caught up, and the friend says, oh, stay for a few more minutes and I'm having fun, but I just don't know how to sort of break that cycle.
Well, you know, I wish I could say you were alone,
Yeah.
but that's, you know, I think that's a very common kind of teenage sort of thing.
Right.
Frankly, it's an adult thing as well. That I really don't think that is a intrinsic motivation or a motivation issue.
Right.
I think that's probably more of, and I'm speaking in generalizations just based on, you know, working with autistic individuals. It's probably more about the executive functioning in the moment. So it's some of the planning, it's some of the impulse control, it's a whole bunch of executive functioning skills that are, you know, getting in the way.
Yeah.
Or difficulties with some executive functioning skills that are getting in the way of her success in
Right.
the moment. You know, being, I mean, many folks, in particular, autistics, in particular autistics who struggle with some aspects of organization, planning, time management, you can sit down and when you're engaged in a fun activity, you lose track of time. And in that moment, hours can go by, but you think it's 20 minutes. And that's a very human thing. But I think it's very common in the autistic space that autistics lose track of that sense of time when they're engaged in something fun and doing fun things. So I think that there's probably a little bit of that. I think there's some of the impulse control of that social network is number one in importance. So being responsive to that friend, going along with a friend, being part of that dyad or that group is more important than the whatever reinforcer you could potentially offer her for coming home. Like my suspicion is that the reason why that we're thinking, oh, the reinforcer worked that one night. Well, no, actually it didn't, because it didn't change your behavior. So I would say the reinforcer is irrelevant for your daughter. I think that I would probably want to lean more into number one, really understanding some of the dangers and some of the risks of being out late at night, SkyTrain, things like that, and then work on some strategies to help plan her time and like plan her escape strategy from a friend, right? So if it's 8 o'clock, do we need to set some reminders on her phone that they're going to go off maybe at 1 at 8:30 to start thinking about, okay, you got half an hour left. What steps do you need to be able to be home for 9? Okay, it's 8:15 now. Where are you in those steps? And at what point do you need to, contact mom to say, hey, you know what, I'm behind in my steps, but this is where I'm at. This is what I'm in the process of doing. Because I think that for those situations, it's more about executive functioning than it is about the reinforcement that you're offering. Sort of one final thought there is that, it is possible that you could find a more powerful reinforcer that would get her home. But, what's again, just from a probability standpoint, what's working against you is that the late night problems are still less frequent than are not as probable as late night good times, right? So the fact that she's likely to she might see that fight, or she might see some other kind of SkyTrain or late at night city shenanigans, but she's probably still having more fun or having the more times than not, it's a good experience than a bad experience.
But then I try and take her phone away from her from that night and the part of the next morning, which is like her big connection socially. And I know that because I try and take the powerful tool and use that as a consequence. And if you're going to come home late, this is going to be the consequence. And even that still doesn't seem to, inflame that desire to want to try and be more on time. Because we're 2 hours late. It's not just, give a 15-minute, half-hour buffer. It's just, it's the amount of time. And again, executive functioning. But you think that using that powerful, motivator, which is her phone, and having it taken away, that would be motivator enough, because it's been done several times, but it's still not making a dent.
Yeah, and again, I would say that it's not likely a reinforcement issue. It's likely the executive functioning. Like I would look to what are other situations that require time management, organization, planning, impulse control. What are other situations where she's demonstrating those skills? And then look for those parallels to say, okay, what tools is she using there that we could pull over into this situation around, going out with friends at night? If you see that generally all of those skills are lacking across environments, then that really would be the priority, I think, for her, would be to really focus in on the executive functioning pieces. Because 2 hours late, like the likelihood is, she's the planning and the impulse control is what's getting in the way. It has nothing to do with
redirect. I just wanted to quickly add as well, because I have ADHD and autism, and I was always late at home, and I sometimes wouldn't turn home. And so for me, I need a big flashing light. So it's something that's more important than the thing I'm doing right now. I need a good thing for me to focus on. That excites me more than this.
I'd like to ask a question. Thanks, Shane, for the excellent presentation. I have a 31-year-old son who lives a lot in his room gaming. He will make a nice frittata for dinner and goes for walks, but he's probably like a lot of autistics. He was bullied through school. Teachers didn't identify it, felt like a loser. And then when he was in his early 20s, he discovered poker. He became a top poker player in Vancouver, but unfortunately crashed out of it about 2 years ago. So, and he felt like a winner finally. He had friends, you know, he was flying off to Southeast Asia, California, and now is depressed, feels like a loser. And I get what you say about that online, his gaming world is his social world. It's his belonging. But my concern is he's so comfortable living with us because he was lonely in his basement bachelor apartment. He's no longer lonely. He's happy. I was a single mom and I'm his main person. He loves me, but you know, he's not living in the world. And I keep reinforcing, you have so many gifts, but I'm afraid that he's slipping into learned helplessness. He's very comfortable and happy. And, you know, he'll say, well, you expect me to work at McDonald's? And I say, no, but, you know, you can get training. There's a place for you. You can go into coding.
Yeah, you know, the one of the things that works in favor of gaming, in particular, online stuff, is from that competence place. When you look at that self-determination, and particularly the competence, is people get immediate positive feedback, right? So when I score you know, you can tell that I'm not familiar with video games. I don't spend time doing it, but you know, you get the immediate feedback of success or failure, and that is almost addictive. And that's why video games are constructed the way they are, is to provide this immediate positive feedback for everything you're doing. And then if you add to that connections, like the belonging piece, then you know what? Absolutely, like they're a hook. So when you think about, you know, the autonomy, the competence, the belonging, those three things, what he's getting in the video game world or what he's getting in the house right now or in the basement, he's getting a lot of that. I would say, like, coming up with things that are within his area of interest. So if he's really interested in certain video games or certain kinds of gaming, well, what are some other opportunities out in the world that we could connect him to? Where can we get him, based on his interests, to connect with a group so there's a sense of belonging, so that he's going to have those experiences of competence? We want to give him other opportunities that are similar to what he's getting, like what he's getting out of the things right now. What are some other examples out in the community that, you know, just one thing that even happens once a week is good enough for a half an hour? That's a win, right? You can build up the amount of it over time, but to expect him to go from the basement full-time to a job full-time, that's not going to happen, right? Like, we need a stepwise approach, and it would start with that, just looking at where can we give him access to autonomy, belonging, and competence in some other domain. Outside of the basement, even if it is around the house. Let's go outside and let's actually work on some, you know, some yard work, or let's go do a project together. Something that is going to get him doing something else that would feed into autonomy, belonging, and competence. Because, you know, the gaming and the comfort at home, that's really, really hard to work against. Like, that's a great gig, right? I mean, you know, he's got it pretty easy. So you know, the tough love there is, this is something that we need to do, and if you're the safe person, you're the connection, you can go along with him to those things as that safe person to experience it for the first time, and slowly work him into that. It's not going to change overnight. It's a lot of steps in the process to get there.
Thank you.
Can I go to some of the questions in the chat? So we've got Lorraine says, is there research that can be given to mental health providers? Do you want to give some more around that question, Lorraine?
Yeah, one of the problems we have with kids like this is that sometimes they're not ready to accept help, as you know, Shane. But if and when they ever are, sometimes they can't find the help that they need. And one of the reasons they can't find it is because mental health providers out there don't understand what you have so clearly explained. And I thought it was a really helpful, brilliant presentation. And if only other people, including people that are trying to find you jobs, could understand that. So I know you can't talk to everyone all at once, but if we, for example, as parents, could refer people who are trying to help to research which describes what you've shared with us, then maybe it would help them help us.
I mean, that's a fantastic question, and again, nice to see you again, Louvain. But I would say that there's a few pieces there. The research is kind of spread out, and we're trying to make sense of it right now. There's a few things that I mean, in particular, projects that we're doing here at Sinneave. One is called it's a learning series aimed at psychologists and mental health providers to demystify autism, to really break it down, similar to, I mean, a lot of the information that informed this presentation is informing that body of work, to really speak to, if somebody is struggling with depression, anxiety, whatever, and they want some counseling support, you don't have to be an expert in autism to provide that. This person is coming to you for anxiety management or for depression. Treat that. That's the presenting issue. That's what you're there to work on. One of the things that is very common is that folks who are, say, the mental health professionals think that they need to be an expert in autism in order to treat depression in an autistic individual. And we just know that that's not true. It's just wrong. So one of our projects that we're developing right now is a bit of a learning series that we can offer out to any mental health provider, all to really try to help them to understand there's not that much they have to do differently to support someone on the spectrum. And,
well, Shane, if I could interrupt you for just a moment, even if you had some simple explanation on a piece of paper backed up with some studies that you've already done that we could just hand to somebody and say, look, here's a problem that is typical, maybe that would help you.
So let me dig through what we've got, and I'll send you what we've got, or like a position statement on it.
What you said, Shane, about is the idea that it's not very different from how you would treat anyone else. That is Anthony Bailey, our psychiatrist here, who's retiring, but who has done a lot of work in this area. That is his view, that really it's about increasing the comfort level of practitioners around autism, because the actual approach to serving people with autism isn't that much different.
My daughter, I think, in an effort to feel like she's belonging and competent and whatever the first one was, I think she exaggerates to others and to me and to maybe herself as well what she actually is competent and belonging in. So, for example, when she was younger, let's say I had her in a dance class and she acted like she was a star dancer and everybody, revered her to me. But then when I actually went there and saw her, she was sort of, she was on the fringe. So how do you deal with that to give them an authentic sense of stuff instead of, you know what I'm saying, I think.
There's I think two considerations there. One is the if she is kind of building up, exaggerating her sense, is it one, an attempt at trying to fit in better, or is it she's doing that because she doesn't have an accurate sense of self-reflection or self-awareness? And I think we want to make sure that we understand which one it is, because how we'd respond would probably be a little different. If it was the case that she's just wanting to belong more, she's wanting to fit in more, so she's exaggerating things, knowing that she's not as good as what she is saying, but she's doing that in order to fit in order to get positive feedback, in order to try to increase that sense of belonging, right? Then I think that, I would look to just trying to create as many opportunities as I could for her in her life that makes sense for her to have belonging experiences. So it's not just dance, it's across a variety of different places where she's going to feel like she's accepted for who she is, which fundamentally is just inclusion. It's more opportunities to feel included in day-to-day activities. That would be it. If it is the fact that she is knowingly exaggerating, how awesome she is at the things. If it's the other one where she's just not accurately aware of how her skills are different from others, then that's a place where I would want to spend more time. Number one, I also don't want to burst her bubble, right? I don't want to undermine, her whatever sort of positive feeling she has about herself. I don't want to make her feel bad about herself by saying, hey, you know what, you're not really as good of a dancer as you thought. But I would want to frame that in a way of, let's look at maybe in other areas of life and try to compare yourself against what is a reasonable comparison. Like her comparing herself against a competition level dancer, that's not a fair comparison. But if she was comparing herself to a novice dancer, maybe that's a better comparison. I wouldn't compare myself to Tiger Woods. I would compare to somebody who isn't good at golf. So I think it's trying to work at, if she's not accurate in her self-assessment, trying to build her self-assessment skills or self-awareness skills. So I think that the two paths are very different depending on what's going on for her.
Well, and I get a little bit frightened that if I don't sort of burst her bubble, so to speak, someone else will in a more cruel way. Like her peers will eventually do that if I allow that kind of thing to go on.
That's possible, but we also don't want to completely shield her from the realities of social interactions with peers, right? Peers are always the great, great at humbling us. Those who are our best friends will keep us down to earth very, very quickly and easily. What we want to avoid, which I think is your fear, is that peers kind of, reject her or neglect her because, they just don't agree with her. So I would say that, if she has better self-awareness skills, if she's better able to understand where her performance is relative to peers, that self-awareness will likely, if she does have good positive relationships and belonging across a variety of different contexts, she will able to sort of temper the way she explains or expresses her skills, because it's probably more important to her to have that sense of belonging with her peers than it is truly to be a fantastic dancer. At the end of the day, it's likely about the peer connections and the inclusion and less about the dancing. So I think that, yeah, you might risk, a certain activity that she's like, I don't want to do that anymore. If it turns out that I'm not good at that activity, I'm never going to do it again. Well, okay, that would be unfortunate, but having a good, accurate set of skills and self-awareness is going to serve her better in life. I'm not sure that answered your question, but it's sort of some things to think about.
I guess I wonder, how do you really build the self-awareness if it's not there? Like if I say, do you think you're as good as whatever some famous dancer is,
Mm-hmm.
And then
by comparison, one of my passions is mountain biking. And I watch a lot of videos that it'll be a video that's aimed at novices. Here are the skills that a novice is working on. Here are the skills that an intermediate biker is working on, or an advanced. You could do the same with skiing. I'm sure there's videos out there for dancing. And that would then give her a way of saying, well, if my skills are like that person and that person is a novice, I must too be a novice. So it's trying to shine a light on those valid comparisons.
I really like that question. I think it definitely reminded me of when I was younger and I would go to my parents, and I still do it now with my dad. And I think for me, because I struggle with emotional regulation, if I want someone to tell me that I'm good, sometimes I'll just say, oh yeah, well done, that was really good. But because I get so emotionally escalated, I see that as not very good. I want someone to be in that place and like exuberate that energy.
Yeah.
And so I don't know, all autistic people are different, but I just know for me, like sometimes I create the shining light around me because I want to see it back, if that makes sense.
Yeah, my son, he's at home right now. He's very sporadic with his school attendance. He's high functioning. He's just frustrating. I don't know how to motivate him. Yeah, I don't know, behavior consultant, that kind of stuff doesn't seem to work. He has to want to go to school. And I don't think and I know he enjoys it when he's there. It's a matter of getting him up and out. I don't know if a counselor will help. I don't want to redirect all my funding from behavior consultant to a psychologist, maybe. I don't even know if that would be effective for what's happening to him.
That's again, much like the earlier question, I wish that it wasn't as common of an experience as what it is. Lots and lots of folks really do struggle with school. It may have nothing to do with the academics. The academics are fine, but it's the social engagement and all of the things around academics. It's navigating the before and after class, the hallways, the lunchroom, all of those bits where things are tough. And if that was the case for your son, I would say that, I would advocate, the opportunity to chat with a counselor at school or if he's got a homeroom teacher, something about where are some places that he can learn a little bit more or create more opportunities to have a strong social connection with someone. Like most individuals, will report, or their school reports satisfaction will increase if they have at least one kind of peer, one close confidant at school. You don't need to have a team of friends, but as long as you've got somebody who's kind of your go-to, that tends to be helpful. I think I did see that somebody wrote something about the Peers program. The Peers is a really good program, an evidence-based program for learning some social interaction skills. Something like that might be a good resource that a counselor, your behavior consultant, or a psychologist, lots of schools are actually even trained in Peers, would be able to support him if the issue was around the social engagement piece. I don't know, maybe the case for him is the social piece is okay, it's more around the academics. If it's more around the academics, I would probably lean more into some of those executive functioning skills, work attack, impulse control, planning, sort of thinking through an activity. That might be where he's struggling. So you'd want to get more of a sense of, what are those activities or situations where he's doing really well and he's successful versus those activities at school that he would say sucks, that he hates them, he doesn't want to participate in them. And then kind of compare the two and say, what are the variables in each one? How do we, if it's more academics, well then, okay, the school then we should be leaning into the school to provide some more academic support. If it's more about peers and friends, what else can we do to increase the social interaction opportunities and the peer sort of skill development and connection opportunities? So we would need to learn a little bit more about that in order to know what is the right pathway for your son. Either way, though, I would say that regardless of the answer, thinking about the autonomy, the competence, the belonging, those three things on either path would be really, really helpful in getting more understanding about where your son fits in all of the mix. Yeah, I think we would just need more information. So I would encourage you to dig in a little bit more with the school and with your son to find out what does he like? What are the things that he likes? What are the things that he hates? And use that to try to, do your best detective work about, is it more social that he's avoiding, or is it more work and academics that he's avoiding?
Yeah, they've sent in a special person called an urgent intervention worker that started working with him last week, and it's they're trying to make school fun for him, and he's still only attended maybe maximum 3 days a week. And I know she's running out of time. Next week will be her last week working with him. And he's a really hard kid to figure out. And it's an emotional roller coaster because he's extremely unpredictable. You know, he had 2 great days in a row. And then today he was 3 steps away from leaving the front door. And when he found out that I couldn't drive him, which we're only 2 blocks from the school, because his dad took the car, he turned around, took off his socks, shoes, jacket, and jumped back into bed.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think we need to hear from him. We need to hear, like, what are his motivations? What is it that why would he turn around and go back to bed? Like, whether or not you're going to drive him or not, like, that has nothing to do with the classroom. That has nothing to do with the social interactions at school. So why is he turning around there? Is it just an excuse to avoid those things at school? Or is there something else going on? We don't know until we get inside of his head. So I would certainly encourage you to, engage with him a little bit more. Maybe there's a school counselor or this special person can do that. But find out, like, what's making him tick. That's going to be key.
Yeah, thanks, May. That also, like, everything that Shay said, like, really resonated with me. And a thing that I've only recently learned that in reflection would have really helped is, because I became so unaware of my sensitivities, I'm sat in classrooms not aware that lights are bothering me, but I'm not aware of it. So I'm walking out, sitting in the bathroom, you know, crying for 15 minutes and coming back in and smiling and I don't know what's going wrong. So like with those 3 days that he's in school, like, they're like great 3 days, you know, so like, don't see that necessarily as like a negative thing. Like, that's a huge thing. Like, he's going to school, you know, that's a really good thing. And like, if he has like a lot of control around turning up to class, like, it's going to be triggering. Like, I remember my mum used to make me get the bus to school. I'm not getting the bus. I'm not going to school. Like, if I go to school and some things will change, like, I just used to walk out. I'd just walk out of school and like, I'd get told off all the time. But because I'm not aware, like, that the bus is causing me anxiety, because I feel like I have to talk and make friends and I struggle. So yeah, it's probably, he might be a really complex individual, but he might also, it might be a few really small things. Thanks. And then Miriam.
Well, we're talking about the importance of having a peer group, but we also mentioned that masking is, you know, quite, you know, not a good thing, I guess you'd say. And sometimes that's mutually exclusive. If you want to be able to have peer relationships, you have to mask, because otherwise your peers won't accept you, unless you can find a peer group of people like you, which so far has been very difficult. So I was the one asking about the peers program, which I'm considering recommending for the individual, a young adult. Because there he would meet other people like him. At least it would be a place to have some exposure to people like him, so that he doesn't feel like he's the only one in the world that has these issues and problems. But my question about that program and all of these various social skills and social intelligence programs is the fear that maybe they just encourage them to mask. Like, to mask who they really are and how they really would normally behave, because if they show themselves as they really are, they won't be able to make relationships.
So that is a fantastic question. And frankly, it's a very heated question within the autism community. So yeah, peers in these different social programs are fantastic. Peers, in my opinion, is the best social skills intervention program in existence. It's amazing. But what is it actually teaching autistics to do? It's teaching them the non-autistic way of interacting with others. So it's skill building around how to engage in a non-autistic way. So it's not saying, hey, you're autistic, be autistic, engage autistically, and everything's going to work out. It's saying, hey, you've got autism, but try these other tools, try these other non-autistic like tools, because that's going to get you some connections with others that otherwise you don't have. It has been criticized as trying to, like, you know, again, I hate the word, but sort of fix or change autistics. And I think that that would be a fair criticism. But I think the way that I choose to interpret it, some disagree with me, some agree with me, but it's not telling autistics, you have to now go forward and only use those strategies and only behave that way. Rather, I see it as one tool in their toolbox that autistics have the choice of using whether or not they want to use. So I would rather anyone, autistics included, to give them all the tools in the world and say, here you go, you pick what tool you want to use and when you want to use it. So if that autistic is seeing a group of non-autistics that they're motivated to want to go and engage with, then yeah, maybe you do have to use the non-autistic tools to create the first to create that first connection and have that first conversation. The hope is, and I think the sort of the implicit hope that's part of the program, I don't think is actually stated anywhere in the resources, but it is that, you know, once those connections are made, and as those individuals, those non-autistic individuals get to know you as an individual, as an autistic individual, they will value you for who you are because you've got a friendship that's based on common interests, that, you know, you're connecting around, you know, those shared ideas, shared interests, and then that's where the friendship and the engagement will develop. And then you don't have to use non-autistic ways of engaging in the future, because once you're in the group, once you're accepted, you're more likely to be able to be yourself. So I think that, you know, well, there's volumes of research to support the effectiveness of peers as a program, as a skill building program, adding tools to the toolbox of an autistic. But no autistic is forced to use them, right? So an autistic may say, hey, yeah, there's some good tools there. Maybe once in a while I pull them out, but I'm not going to mask. I may walk up and introduce myself in a non-autistic way, quote unquote, but I might say, hi, my name's Shane, I'm autistic, and, you know, this is who I am. Take it or leave it, right? Like it's about ways of connecting with people, but it's not requiring necessarily autistics to be less autistic. And I think that, you know, that might be a distinction or slicing hairs that is not necessary. To me, that's important, because yeah, if it were my choice, if I had a magic wand I could wave, I would change the norms in society in such a way that an autistic or any other neurodiverse person would not have to mask. Like that shouldn't have to happen. So that would be the ideal. But in the interim right now, you know, what the hope is for peers is to give autistics tools to allow them to connect and engage with others. And then they've got more tools in their toolbox to make their own individual choice about whether or not they're going to, you know, use a non-autistic way to engage or use an autistic way to engage. It's ultimately, my belief is, empower people to make their own decisions. And I think ultimately that is what peers is attempting to do.
Can I add to that? Yes, that has been the criticism that they're teaching, that the two criticisms that I hear most often is, first and foremost, teaching them to be non-autistic like, and that they're parroting behavior, non-autistic behavior. And the other is that it's overly structured and rigid in its format. But the peers, along with Michelle Garcia-Winner, focus on building awareness of one's behavior and how that's perceived. And then one of the things that it builds in is practice. And that's an important recognition that one doesn't change behavior, again, assuming it's because a person has made the choice to modify their behavior in order to achieve their personal goal. But the idea being that that practice is built in, because time and repetition is what will enable that change. And so I think it is one that certainly it's a valid question, is one that individuals have to evaluate. Can I say something to close, because we're getting very near the end? I'll turn it over to Julia at the end, but I wanted to thank you, Shane, for bringing, I think, what is sort of an undercurrent of awareness that we as autistic individuals or as families have, that these are the underlying principles. And you're articulating them in this way raises it to a higher level of awareness, and I thank you for that. I want to be a little bit, first I'll end on a positive note, but I want to burst the bubble a little bit, because I want to be really clear that it's understood why it's hard for our families. And the autonomy, you know, because from the get-go, we as parents and families worry about the safety and security of our kids. So as when they were younger, we were always in there interfering because we were not confident of the executive functioning skills, and we needed to protect them in their security. And then as well, our kids were just like trying so hard to keep it together and to do all the tasks that that it was keeping them on track. And again, we were probably heavy-handed. So there was a less opportunity for autonomy there than there might have been for a neurotypical kid. For the belonging part, we all know that. They didn't get invited to the birthday parties. They didn't, right from the get-go. And the whole thing of finding your tribe was really, really difficult. And many went through their entire school years. In fact, I heard on the radio this morning a woman talking about her grade 7-year-old, or grade 7-year, 7-age student whose entire school career is sitting in the corner of the playground with his iPad, not relating to anybody. And so there is that lack of peer that happens. In terms of the competency, what we find is that that we see ourselves, all of us, in reflection to our peers and the people around us. If you don't have those peers, and parents don't count in the same way, then you don't know who you are. And so what I find is that the young adults that I have gone through these experiences often don't see anything positive in themselves, and are so busy focusing on the next challenge that they forget to pat themselves on the back for the stages already achieved. And so we get into this, they keep trying. And so that whole thing of, did my efforts have an effect, ends up not very well or no. And then as families, we keep saying, try again, timing, repetition, and that's right. And that and we try and break it down into small steps. And in fact, that does have some ability to generate resiliency, but it can also get us stuck in that place of learned helplessness. And so that's where many of our families are at this age, when we're at the Square Peg Society level of young adults, where many of them have that sense of, I've tried this, I've tried that, I've tried that, it's not working, I'm gonna take my socks off and go back to bed. Mm-hmm. And so just letting you know that. And I'm sure that you already do, but as families, again, I want you to know that we understand and we appreciate this difficult place we're in. And then my positive note here, I feel that this autonomy, I did an interview with my son for our next meeting on independent living. He's just moved out 2 months ago to take a job in Victoria. I asked him about all the components of independent living and blah, blah, blah. And at the end, I asked him, what's the best part of living on your own? And he said to me unequivocally, the freedom to make my own choices. And so that told me that, one, I can have this conversation with him about autonomy, belonging, and competence. And I can ask him, how would you put this together? How do you see you can put the pieces together? But it also tells me that after his probation, he's doing well. After his probation, we may have the option for him to take the next level job again in Vancouver. It is costing a bunch of money to live away from home. And, you know, the fact that he said that tells me that paying the money and continuing to live alone is probably more important in terms of that autonomy piece. And from there, it will enable him to pull the other pieces together. And I feel that's available to so many of our bright, capable young people. I'm going to shut up there. Julia, what would you like to add? Or Shane, do you want to add to that?
I have a question statement that is a blend of Miriam's and yours, Joette. And it's to do with masking. Like, I really want to be able to unmask, because I realize that a lot of my anxiety is around that. And I feel really like motivated to be my authentic self. But when I am my authentic self, it's not met positively sometimes. And one of the reasons I really like living alone is because I don't have to do the social, I walk in the door, hi, how are you, how was your day? I actually don't care. I just want to filter out and be in my comfort zone. How can I think my question is, how can I continue to motivate myself to unmask when I feel like me being myself is offensive and makes other people uncomfortable?
Yeah.
It's a fantastic question. You know, one of the things that I think is the most effortful, or I shouldn't say the most effortful, but a very effortful part of that is trying to find spaces that, like researching, discovering, working to find those spaces that are going to be more likely to be successful, like more likely to be inclusive, more likely to not be judgmental. One of the first things that you know is a common recommendation is find others like yourself, other autistic groups, other places, whether it's online or in person. Ideally, it is in person, getting together with another autistic for coffee, sitting down or in the park and just chatting about stuff where you know you can be completely yourself and you are not going to be judged about it. When we talk about that sense of belonging, right, that's a huge piece. If you are walking from environment to environment feeling like you have to mask, you are missing out on that sense of belonging. So you want to find, ideally, those places where you can connect with other people, be in that space, and be free to do whatever you want to do, you know, be autistic, and know that it's going to be accepted, it's valued, and there's no judgment there. You know, the risk that we run in the current environment, in the current society, is that if you are trying to pursue non-autistic spaces, you're increasing the likelihood of more people judging you and you having to feeling like you have to mask and you like not fitting in, right? Getting the feedback that you don't want to get. You know, if you try to, again, square peg round hole, or going into those environments, you're setting yourself into environments, or you're putting yourself in environments where people don't understand. That's not on you. There is no autistic who that is their fault. That is a community, a society, that is the culture in which we live. That's what needs to change. Not the autistic, but the culture. In the meantime, for your own well-being, for your own, you know, just mental health, finding more opportunities to belong to like-minded groups. That is really, really key. You know, absolutely, I agree with you. Many folks that we support that I've known over the years would prefer to live it alone than with someone else for the reasons you mentioned. But that sense of belonging that we all crave, that's something that, you know, is really rooted in people who are like you, people who think like you, who react to the environment in similar ways, you know, people who are less judgmental, all of those groups. So to find those crews, to find those individuals that you can partner up with, hang out with, that will do wonders, because what it does, if you look at the hours in the day, it increases the amount of time in the day that you get to be you, decreases the amount of time that you feel the pressure to mask. So the more opportunity, the better.
Isn't that though, everybody, neurotypical or not, struggle in life? Finding someone who lets you be you? I mean, that sort of sounds like a statement that that's what everyone's life goal is. So how is, being autistic and finding that going to be any easier than it is for everybody?
Well, I think it's going to be a lot harder for autistics than everybody else. I would agree with you that in general, that's what everybody wants. You're going through life trying to find individuals and groups that accept you for who you are. But if you think about every interaction that you have over the span of a day, now that restrictions are lifted and we can go about our business and go into shops and walk around on the street, the non-autistic person is out in the environment talking, again, just by probability, with a whole lot of non-autistic people. So you kind of have a meeting of the minds. Whether or not there's common interests and friendships will develop, I'm not talking about that. I'm just talking about a meeting of the minds, right? That meeting of the minds is we're all using the same or operating from the same social norms. When the autistic goes out into that same community, they're now operating from a different set of social norms and social differences. And so whether I'm, just buying something at Starbucks, or I'm passing somebody on the street, or somebody on the bus starts trying to make small talk with me, there's thousands of these social interactions that a non-autistic would have that they don't think twice about. But the autistic, though, having those conversations or those interactions with a non-autistic has that many more bits of feedback about the differences in the way their brain works relative to the non-autistics. So you're just getting bombarded throughout the day with the differences that exist rather than the similarities. Even though we know, we're well aware, there's way more similarities and differences just in human beings, but it's still something that autistics, just going through the motions every day, are coming face to face with constant reminders on how their brain is different than everyone else's. And that's a piece that, so, I do agree with your statement that, we all are struggling with that. That's what everybody wants. But I would say that it's magnified many times in the autism space versus the non-autism space.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to acknowledge that I don't think everyone does struggle to find a sense of belonging. I think some people find it quite easy. Yeah, I think
individual differences, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think as well, like Miriam was saying, when you take people to a peers group and we teach them to be neurotypical, you walk down the street and you've got an autistic person masking as neurotypical, you bump into them, you have a conversation, that's a neurotypical conversation they're having with you because that's what they've been taught. So you don't experience a sense of belonging because they go teaching people to isolate, And so it's how many autistic friendly spaces do we have that just are run by autistic people for autistic people? A lot of it does have the neurotypical intervention. And so it's a big topic. It's interesting.
Yeah, if you haven't heard, I'm sure there's lots of folks here who have, but there's this thing that we call the double empathy problem. And what it is basically that social interactions, that meeting of the minds, the social interactions between autistic and non-autistic, there's three versions that we've got a lot of data on that shows patterns. Two non-autistics can talk with one another, can engage, and it's social, it's they're connecting, it's positive, everyone's happy and great and yay. You put two autistics together and they will connect, they'll engage, happy, yay, right? It's working out. But the minute you put the autistic and the non-autistic together, communication breaks down. And suddenly now it's oil and water. So the waters fit together, the oils fit together, but oil and water doesn't fit together very well. So, what we have to realize is that autism is part of the normal range of human functioning. And so for societies to be organized in one way that, you know, adopts certain norms that cater to certain groups or a certain group, you are marginalizing others. And this is the same whether we're talking autism, we're talking race, we're talking sexuality. It does not matter, but the system, our system, is organized in a way, and the facts are that we are marginalizing autistics in what we say is that quote unquote normal social interaction, right? When really there's like, it's this whole idea of it's this dichotomous autistic versus non-autistic. We know, we actually have the knowledge that it's not a black and white thing. It's not autistic versus non-autistic. There isn't a switch that is flipped. It's this spectrum that we all have a bit of autism in us, and autistics have a little bit of non-autism in them. Like we're all somewhere in there. There isn't a line that you cross it and suddenly it's like, okay, well, as of that line, you're autistic. I mean, artificially we do from a diagnostic standpoint, but that's purely just a label. It doesn't mean anything in daily practice. So yeah, it's a complex discussion about very complex ideas and practices. I wish it weren't so, but here we are.
Just reminding everyone that Julia within ScorePeg hosts a conversation group once a month to create that place of acceptance where autistic individuals can talk to other autistic individuals. And also to remind people that limiting the time and setting boundaries around these things helps people cope. So, many autistic individuals can operate very successfully in environments where there are a lot of neurotypicals, but they just also may need that time of respite as well. Julia, we have to stop. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shane. That's such a good.
Thank you. It was much appreciated, and thank you everyone for coming.
Thank
Thank
you
you very much. I appreciate the invitation, and yeah, please reach out to us if you have any questions. It's been a pleasure. So thank you for the invitation.